Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to talk about next generation APIs at Salesforce. If you are not here to listen to that, well, welcome. You'll listen to it anyways. My name is Jay Hurst. I'm a product manager with Salesforce. I manage our enterprise API, which includes SOAP, REST, and bulk APIs. And I'm going to give you guys the forward-looking statement. Raise your hand if you've never seen this. Trick question. So we will be talking about some future-looking technology today. A lot of what we're talking about is not yet GA or even available in beta, but it will be coming over the next couple of releases. If you are considering making any purchasing decisions, please make those decisions based on what is currently available in the generally available product and not what is forward-looking. If you have any questions about what is forward-looking, what is not, feel free to let me know after, and I can clarify it, and I'll be trying to highlight things as we go through as well. So a quick agenda. We have about 38 minutes left. We're going to go through some of our composite APIs, talk about what we currently have, what we're looking at a little bit future. We're going to go through our bulk API v2, what we're looking at there, what we have in production today. We're going to talk about collections in the REST API, mass actions in the REST API, and the Open API initiative. So quite a bit of things. Maybe we'll have time for Q&A. So what are the current composite APIs, or rather, what is a composite API? So a composite API is an API that's built up of functionality from other APIs. So combining APIs together, giving you the ability to do some sort of orchestration with those APIs. The composite API that we're going to talk about allows you to take outputs that came from one of your calls and use them as inputs into another. So let's say I queried for an account, and I wanted to create a contact with that underneath that account. I could use the account ID from the query for that contact. As we look for why we're even looking at composite APIs, it's really about efficiency. How do we allow you to do more with fewer API calls? How do we allow you to do more in mobile devices? How do we allow you to do more just as a general faster practice when doing things like complex UIs? Hopefully making it easier for you to use. We have a number of composite APIs on Salesforce. The first is batching REST. This allows you to take up to 25 unrelated API calls, just simply pass them in together. We execute them serially, pass you back the response. This is a truly just enhancement for limiting the number of round trips. Very useful for mobile, and was also kind of our first step into composite. Second we came out with was tree save. Tree save allows you to take a hierarchy list, such as accounts, contacts, opportunities, tasks, cases, insert them all at once. So you can kind of build that hierarchical tree. It only supports insert, does not support updates, does not support deletes. It was really tuned just for a very specific insert use case. And then we have the generic composite, and composite is kind of a superset of both batching and tree save. So you can build tree save and batching using composite, which is kind of what we did on the back end. But this is what allows you to take those calls from one resource and pass them in to another. And then finally, we have Apex REST. If you guys have used this, you can build whatever composite service you want. Extremely developer heavy on your side, though. So what does a composite look like? On the left, we see we have 2 contacts, 2 accounts, 2 cases, 2 tasks, and then we want to describe our account and describe a case. Or we want to run a query on an account and describe a case. Composite allows you to do that against a single endpoint. You build up the payload itself, you pass it in, we do all the linking, we do all the record ID management and everything else. Okay, so we're going to jump into a lot of demos today just because it's nicer. That's what I've been told. So composite here, let me grab the body, and we'll make this bigger so you guys can see it in just a second. I wasn't just testing this, by the way. Right before I ran into this hall. Oh no, demo's not gonna work. Okay. So in this case, what we're doing is we're posting a big payload into this Composite, what is it doing? First thing it's going to do is it's going to do a post against the account URL. So this is a standard REST create. It's going to give it all of the field names here for creating a Salesforce account name. And then we're going to give it a reference ID. This reference ID is what Salesforce will use to start connecting things together. It's kind of your placeholder ID when there's really no ID. Second thing we're going to do a post against contacts. We're going to create a contact named Parker Harris. And we're, in place of the account ID, which we don't have yet because we haven't created the account, we're going to use that reference ID from above, and using an @ syntax, just say @account1.id. So whatever the ID was that returned from that first call is going to be what's used for the second call. Similarly, when we do a post for contact 2, do the same thing. For task 1, the difference here is we're using contact 1 ID and account 1 ID. And then we're doing a few different gets. We're going to get the information about the account 1 that we created. That should just be all the fields that we set. We're going to do a what's called friendly URL request, where we're going to get all of the contacts on the associated account, so it should come back with the 2 we created. We're going to get information about a user from the get account 1 call, which is right here, and passing in the .owner ID, so you can see how you can start to string things together. We'll do a simple describe, and then just pull out a couple more gets. So if we execute this, and if it works, we should see that we created this account right here. We can actually go and verify that it is created. Salesforce account, let's increase the font for you guys. We'll see that there are indeed 2 contacts that were created under it, along with that open activity that was associated with Parker and with the account. If we go back to the REST Explorer, we'll also see creation of the task here, and then we see the describe of the account, all of the information on the describe, and so on and so on. I'm not going to go through all the describes since there's just a lot of detail in it. But what this will allow you to do is to start to string together those more complex structures of things you want to do. We do have the ability to say halt on error. What this will do is if something happens to error in the middle, we can roll back the entire transaction. So you can begin to get a transactional coupling behind your more complex behaviors. So this is what we're starting to see as being very useful in our new Lightning UI. As you know, we are an API-first company. We actually design our new Lightning UI on top of our APIs, which has pushed us to build these newer, better tuned APIs to improve the performance and iterate in that respect. So in this way, we're going to be able to do things through the Lightning API, like actually get a describe layout with the correct information to paint the page, so we don't have to make 10 calls. We can make a single call instead. So very practical use cases. Okay. So that was a composite. Next thing we're going to talk about is a bulk API v2. How many here have used the bulk API? How many here have used the bulk API outside of data loader? All right, a few of you. You guys run into any complexities around limits with the bulk API? Yes. Okay, so it's really not customer friendly. We realize that. There's a lot of row limits, file size limits, batch limits. There's no history. You have to do a lot of asynchronous polling. And also it's syntactically different than our other REST APIs. And so we really took a step back and said, what should we be providing in terms of the bulk API? And it really comes down to a couple of things. But what we have today, and you're going to see my awesome PowerPoint skills here. First, we have to make a call to construct a batch. This is what you do. So you take your data set, you bust it up into a bunch of CSV files, a bunch of different batches of up to 10,000 records each. You then go ahead and submit these batches to us. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, that took me so long to do. It's embarrassing. You then have to go ahead and start checking the status. Are we there yet as we go ahead and actually start processing the batches? You have to keep saying that. That wiggle took a long time too, let me tell you. I'll be teaching PowerPoint after this. The idea behind bulk v2, what we really wanted to tune for was rather than having you manage all of the intricacies of our limitations, we want to make sure that you just send us the file, we do everything after that. So you just say go, you send a big file to us, we then go ahead and start chopping it up. Here we'll see we actually start with a couple of what we call canary batches, where we process them to try and get the optimal batch size based on what you're doing. What is your Apex doing? How long is it taking for those to be processed? We then go ahead and next time we might slice off a few more batches. So we control all of that ourselves. We don't expose it out to you. And ultimately, we'll get into a state where we can give you a metering based on the number of records that you're pushing rather than the number of batches that you're pushing. And if you've used the bulk API, if you've hit the bulk API limits before, you guys have probably, it happens a lot. I accidentally set my bulk API limit to 1, and I blew through 10,000 batches inside of 5 minutes, or I have a major load, but I have to lower my batch size to 500 or 1,000 because I have a lot of Apex code that's going on and I can't finish these processing. And really all of that is artifacts of what we should not be exposing to you. We should just say, hey, you give us the file, we'll chop it up. We can't tell you exactly that it's going to finish in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, but what we can say is we can take all of that headache off of you. And I will not be pushing in a million records today, but I will show you the default. So, let's see, start here. So the first thing that we did was, if you've ever tried to use bulk through the Workbench before on the REST service itself, you know that you have the async, it's services async version. Maybe you've not done that, but then you have to pass in a session ID header. We renamed the session ID strange for some reason, and it was confusing. So what we want to do instead is just make this a standard set against the data service, so it's going to be /bulk. We are still doing jobs, so you'll post to a job. The first thing you need to do is create a job. So we'll go ahead and do that. And let's see if my session timed out. It did. Could have predicted that. All right, trying it again. It is bulk, and I didn't. Thank you. Do you want to come up and give this to now? Make my life easier. No, just kidding. But this is very similar to what you'd see before. You open up a job, you're saying, I'm going to insert accounts. From there, you're going to send in a batch, and we'll probably be changing this in the next iteration. We're trying to do bulk without batches, but for now, batches are still exposed to you, even though you don't have to do anything specific with batches. Go ahead and grab my massive bulk file of 20 accounts. Change the headers to be, execute that. And I have to do a put against it instead of a post. All right, so now we've created it. So I've uploaded my batch, my entire file. What I want to do is now close my job. So we'll go ahead and tell Salesforce that the upload is complete. This will be eventually so that we can support things like extremely large files, multi-part files, things that you can pass in multiple pieces of. And I have to patch it. Okay, so now that job is up in Salesforce. And we have this new job right here that was created. We'll see that 10 records failed out of 20. I expected that. And what we also see is we see this kind of orphaned job. And this is, again, an artifact of the way we're exposing it. We are going to be rebuilding this page for GA. Where you won't see that it'll look completely different, but this is the batch that I actually sent in, the one that ends in 8H. That's what I sent in, and then this first set is the one that Salesforce peeled off to actually process. Since there are only 20 records, it only needed to peel off one. Had there been 20 million, it would have needed to pull off a different set of chunking. But I had 10 fail. The reason I had 10 fail is I have a validation rule on my query that essentially says if the value is test1, fail. It's a really complex query. But I can start to do interesting things now. If I do a get, I can get the status of the job. I can see that I had 10 failed. I can also do a success files. Is that right? Successful results. And this is slightly different than what we had in V1, where you would just get a single file back. Here you can get a file of all your successes, the ones that were successfully saved. Or I can post to failed results and get back a list of everything that failed and why. Now these failed because of this validation rule that I have. But this is one of those optimizations. Data loader does this for you. What it does is it downloads the file and then does a chunking of itself. We're going to just do it for you. That way you can hit the failed results, pull that down, fix the file as you need, and then resubmit it if you need to, which is what we'll do here. We are going to do this in a slightly different way. I'm going to actually pass in a body that is a multi-part request. I'm going to post directly against jobs. Give it a multi-part request and set the headers to be of content type, multi-part. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing multiple operations at once. So I will be pushing up the file, I'll be opening the job, I'll be shutting the job down, and I'll be submitting it. So execute that. You'll see that I have an upload complete. If I grab this ID and now check it, it gives me an error. So we'll just go through the UI. And here we'll see that I actually did insert those 10, and they were successful. So again, still have some bugs to work out with this. It is in beta right now. If you guys are interested, please feel free to reach out to either myself or your account rep or your service rep, and we can go ahead and get that enabled for you. We are targeting a GA in the December release, or I'm sorry, the winter release, not December. I didn't move it, trust me. Where we'll have some slight differences, but overall the improvements are for other reasons. What is going on? All right. I lost my mouse. Wow. What's that? Escape? No, that's not doing it. I somehow managed to put a different window over there. Sorry about this, everyone. Wow. Oof. All right, collections and REST. So if you guys have used the REST API before, you're probably aware of outside of the Composite API, we currently only allow single record operations. So if you go to /sobject/account/account ID, you can update that account, you can delete it, but you can only do one record at a time. And that works. It works very well, but it doesn't quite get us the scalability we need for some of these larger part operations. The SOAP API, on the other hand, allows for 200 records at a time, and that's really our default save logic down in our core application, is we can save up to 200 records in a single call, which is why we expose it that way in REST, or I'm sorry, in SOAP. So we want to actually do the same thing in REST. So give you the ability to pass up to 200 objects at the same time to a single endpoint. We'll process them and then ultimately support the same headers as SOAP. Make sense? Perfect. This is just going to bother me the entire time. Woohoo, yay. Second most interesting thing I did today. All right, so this is all extremely forward-looking in the sense that I am driving this off of an internal demo org showing winter. So what I'm going to do is pop in here. Under Composite, we will have a new resource called SObjects. Inside this SObjects resource, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply pass in a number of records. In this case, I'm passing in 5 accounts, naming them a fairly straightforward thing, Trailhead DX1 through 5. If I execute this, I get the same thing I'm going to get every time. Try it one more time. I will get all 5 successfuls. We can go ahead and grab one of these and take a look at it. We should see that Trailhead DX1. Yes, it went through. In fact, we can even go to the accounts, look at all accounts, and see that all 5 are indeed there. So not extremely groundbreaking, I would say. However, this is probably the most frustrating thing if you've ever used REST at Salesforce is not being able to do multi-record operations. So this is going to get us into a much closer parity with our SOAP API. We love our SOAP API. It's great for the machine-to-machine interaction. However, the device-to-machine or user-to-machine REST is kind of the way everybody's going. I'm sure you guys know that better than I do, but we are definitely on a path to up-level our REST API in a lot of ways. And the second way we're going to do that is through the Mass Actions API. And this really came out of a request that we had, again, from our Lightning UI team where they wanted to replicate some behavior that they have currently in Aloha, where if I go to a list view on leads and I check the select all box and I say I want to change the owner, it can change all of the owners of everything I selected to a specific user. Pretty straightforward, really hard to do, it turns out. It's not that easy through REST especially. But the idea is that you need to perform the same action against a large set of records. The way we're going to do this is through a transform and a list. The list is a list of IDs that we want to get. We're looking at a number of different ways to gather these IDs. The one I'm going to show you is going to be a SOQL query. So you pass in a query that identifies the records you want to update. We're also looking at just a plain old array and a list view ID. You give us a list view and we can drive off that. And then you want to provide a common transform. This is going to be field changes, platform actions, just the same thing you want to do to that over and over again. So we'll go ahead and demo it. And ultimately, we also want to get to a asynchronous version of this as well, so you can do more than just that 200, where you can actually do a callback if needed to get an updated status. So in this one, let's see if I'm going to try to not reset this again and see if it fails. It'll be something like composite/mass. But what we see here is I'm passing in select ID name from account. I'm going to do a patch to these. So my patch, let's go ahead and actually delete this guy. I'm not setting any headers. And then we're saying pass into the account this query that I'm using, the ID of the query, and then the fields I want to change. Here we're changing number of employees. Let's also go ahead and change something here. Probably wouldn't do this well. We'll just say type equals customer. So if this works, looks like everything worked there. If I go ahead and refresh this, I should see all of those Trailhead DXs get set with customer here. And if I drill into each one of these, what I should see is the number of employees is also set to 1,800, which is not a field that I had provided. So The idea is, again, fairly simple, fairly straightforward, but we think that this is going to really enable not just our internal use cases, but some of the larger ISV use cases as well. Because since you don't necessarily know what a customer has done with their list views, with their page layouts, everything else, having the ability to do a very simple transform across a defined query can be very useful. And as we're running into the last 5 or so minutes, the next thing is the Open API initiative. How many here have heard of the Open API initiative? Not a whole lot. OK. How many have heard of Swagger? All right. So that's a little better. The Open API initiative is essentially a governing body that is taking Swagger into an open source project that's going to be supported, providing a vendor-neutral way to describe a REST API. Salesforce joined in March 2017. We really feel that this is kind of the way to get descriptions and documentation about your API out. We're fairly invested in it, not only in exposing our REST API, which you should be able to see some of this at Dreamforce. We have a POC working of how do we reinvent our documentation at Salesforce. If you use the documentation, it can be very difficult at times to find what you need, even more difficult to just try something out very quickly. The workbench is great. However, if you don't know about the workbench, it's very difficult to learn in some respects. With the new documentation, as we look at it on the right-hand side, we'll have the ability to kind of do a try-it-out flavor, where you can go ahead, look through our documentation. It's all inline Swagger, inline YAML. You'll be able to go ahead and pop open a little screen where you can actually try the API directly from the docs itself. So this is something we have in POC. Should be out on the floor out here, and I think there's a session delivering it. Hopefully I didn't spoil it. But that's for describing our Salesforce APIs. The second thing we want to do is actually be able to start ingesting external APIs that are using Swagger. And this is where it's going to be very helpful for doing things like, I need to spin up an Apex REST service that can go out and connect to this external API, get the data back, and go ahead and continue on Apex. Normally, you can do this through WSDL to Apex if you guys have used that, or you can hand code your Apex classes. We're trying to give you a way to do this directly through kind of if you could think of Swagger to Apex or Open API to Apex, where you can just point us to an external service. We'll go out, read it, build out all the stubs, and then you can go ahead and use this. We experimented with this a little bit using Heroku's Interagent Connect. We'll have some more information at Dreamforce with some other partners we're working with. But that's kind of Open APIs in general. Ignore the title on this. It's the wrong title. It should say Next Gen APIs Roadmap. What are the roadmap where we have? Well, right now, in summer 17, we have Composite API is GA. We are pilot with API, or with the bulk API v2. For Dreamforce, my goal is to get bulk API to GA. We're kind of on the bubble of that right now. We may have a little extra work, which means it might be in beta, but we're pressing for GA right now. We are going to have the Open API ingest and pilot, so being able to take that external service, plug it into Apex, generate your Apex REST classes, and we'll have the Open API external in a POC, so that documentation that you'll see in our Salesforce docs. For Spring, looking at getting collections and REST up to pilot, mass actions to pilot, and taking both the sides of the Open API to beta. With that, we'll have Q&A. Do we have mics, or are they just shouting? All right, you jumped up fast. Go ahead and shout.
Yeah, for the bulk API too, you mentioned something about moving away from batches to number of records.
Yes.
Could you just talk more about that?
So we are no longer counting the number of batches. We are only counting the number of records. That's the goal. I mean, we'll still remain parity. So you'll have 100 million records a day as our target. Which is what you can do with the bulk API today, V1. You do that through 10,000 batches of 10,000 records. So getting rid of that is our goal. There's some design considerations on how do we allow V1 and V2 to coexist without giving you 200 million records, because that would potentially hurt us. So we're figuring out what the best way to amortize that across, but that's the goal. All right, I saw the wall really quick, sorry. So the question is, with the Composite API, can I hit custom REST resources? The answer is no right now. The reason being is there's a very fine line between building a orchestration that's simple and building a programming language. I didn't want to get into building a programming language, and since if you're exposing it in REST, you can expose anything you need there. So just erred on the side of less complexity. Okay.
But the problem I run into is with mature orgs, sometimes accounts and contact opportunities have a lot of fields. So will these technologies also hopefully be some of the processing for those large number of fields?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is we have, so my team has recently taken ownership of Sockle again. Through internal political reasons, we didn't own it for a number of years. We have ownership of it now. One of the low bar things we're looking at is how to supply a select star. It's a very complex thing for us to do, but if that's the number one Sockle. So that's what we're looking at. Not sure we can get there in the next release, but we're trying. As far as timing out or what? Timing out? No. There's, again, we have a different set of features that are coming out around change data capture, which my team owns. I'm talking about that tomorrow in the summit, but change data capture being how do I get a replication of my Salesforce database externally, and how do I then keep it up to date? There's 3 parts to that. There's the day 0 extract, which is what you're talking about. How do I get the world right now? The second part is how do I then start getting delta changes? And the third is how do I do reconciliation, which is a day 0 in a smaller scale, hopefully. There is a team dedicated to solving the day 0 problem, I've been told, because we need it for other use cases. So I would expect something in the spring timeframe. But I don't have much more than that. Other than change data capture, you can listen to me babble about that tomorrow. Yes. If you have, you've just uploaded 10,000 records and you need to change all of them to a certain owner. You need to re-ownership change them. You want to build a UI that can take somebody's list view and then do a select box and have them change fields inside that select box. Change status of all my leads. Question is, can we do mass convert? I would expect so, but we haven't tested it. It's brand new. That's why it's running off Abanov's box instead of the live servers. But we'll definitely take that back and look into it. So the question is, with Open API being able to connect to an external service, how do we manage security between Salesforce and that external service? Salesforce actually has a fairly little known feature called name credentials. And name credentials is the path for doing connections external to Salesforce and doing that in a controlled manner, whether it's a single user connection or a multi-user connection based on OAuth. So that's the right way to do it through Apex. So in the example I showed there, you would need to do the batch ID. However, the way it actually should be is through the failed results file. Everything that was not successfully processed gets dropped into failed results with the reason why it failed. Yeah, so the question is really around what is the correct management flow with errors, especially when you're dealing with large data sets and potentially using middleware vendors. I don't know if I have the exact answer for that. We can talk afterwards and get a little bit more information about what you're trying to do or where you see the problem being.
We use name credentials, and it would be very helpful if there was some way that you could have the headers for that name credential as a child. Like there's one vendor that's got 3 headers, and so every rest of it you gotta do.
Okay, I can dig that back. That makes sense. The bulk V2? So it's the same parity with V1 with the exception of query. So you can do insert, update, and delete, and hard delete. We do not support query yet. Like I said, we just took over Sockle, so we're looking at a more holistic look of what is the right way to do federated queries across Salesforce. So query is not going to be in the short-term list. So bulk V1 is still there for that.
Any general limitations on Composite API, like columns and contacts and opportunities, and then opportunities, activities, getting along?
So with what are the limitations in Composite? The limitations we have right now are 25 operations. I believe it's 5 levels deep if you're doing relationships, and 5 unique. No, it's not even 5. It's just 5 levels deep. Yeah, that should be the only thing. So if you're trying to do an account to a contact to a child object under contact to a child object under that to a child under. If you have much more than that, it's complex. Yeah.
So it's still going to be 200 per session call. I can't spin up a bunch of asynchronous tunes. I mean, at the end of the day, those are still going to be functional process at 200.
So the way it works today is every user attach every request in SOAP can do up to 200. If you spin up 3,000 concurrent requests to do 200, we start metering a long-running request at 10 seconds. And so you're only allowed 25 long-running requests. So you'll hit your concurrency limit on that request. But let's just say, if you could create all 200 in under 10 seconds, then yeah, you can do that. You're allowed to. You might, if you start causing harm, you'll get throttled. But you're gonna hit your concurrency limit faster because 200 takes time. In most situations, most people put Apex triggers and validation rules and workflow and everything else. Okay, I think we have time for one more. If there's one interesting question. Yes? The external objects do work with the REST API. They're exposed as any other entity. If you have enabled writable external, you can write. Otherwise, it's read only. Yeah, no worries. All right, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. Hopefully this gave you some interesting looks into the future and what we're going after. Thank you.